The lead disclosure rule informs families about lead in their housing from paint, dust, and soil by requiring the disclosure or sharing of available information on lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards before the sale or lease of most pre-1978 housing. The lead disclosure rule refers to the landlord as the lessor and the renter as the lessee in rental transactions. In sales transactions, the rule refers to the owner as the seller and the buyer as the purchaser. We'll use these terms throughout this presentation. Since 1996, sellers and lessors of pre-1978 housing units have been required to provide information and available records on lead and its hazards to purchasers and lessees through a lead disclosure form. The disclosure provides notice of the presence of any known lead-based paint, dust and soil, or lead-based paint hazards to residents, as well as a lead warning statement that describes the possible presence of lead. The disclosure also provides notice if there is no knowledge of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards in the unit. The rule applies to all target housing, regardless of the housing being HUD-assisted or not. Target housing is housing constructed before 1978, with some exceptions. It does not include housing exclusively designated for the elderly or persons with disabilities, such as a retirement home or assisted living. It also does not include zero-bedroom units unless a child under 6 years old lives in or is expected to live in the housing. The federal rule does not require testing, but testing may be required in your city, state, or in some HUD-assisted units. Please visit www.epa.gov/lead for state program contacts. During the purchase or lease process, purchasers and lessees must receive all available and known information about lead paint in the property, as well as the Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home pamphlet. The rule is jointly enforced by HUD and EPA, who update the pamphlet and disclosure forms together. The Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home pamphlet is available in multiple languages on EPA's website. A downloadable PDF version of the pamphlet can be found on EPA's website below. To maintain compliance with the rule, we will cover housing types that the rule applies to, roles and responsibilities, correct lead disclosure forms, and record keeping. First, the rule applies to most transactions to sell or lease target housing, including subleases. Exceptions to the rule include sales of target housing at foreclosure, short-term leases of 100 days or less where no lease renewal or extension can occur, leases of target housing that are confirmed to be lead-based paint-free by a certified lead inspector under a federally accredited state or tribal certification program, or renewals of existing leases in target housing where the lessor has previously disclosed all information required and no conditions have changed. Now, we'll discuss roles and responsibilities of sharing and receiving the information. The seller, lessor, and agent share information and available reports with the purchaser or lessee about all known lead or lead hazards. Next, the purchaser or the lessee acknowledges they received the available and known information. The acknowledgement is documented through signatures on the disclosure form. Before signing the sales contract or the lease agreement, the sellers and lessors must provide prospective residents with the Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home pamphlet. The pamphlet is available in multiple languages. Then, disclose any known information concerning lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards. After that, disclose relevant information such as the location of the lead-based paint and/or lead-based paint hazards, and the condition of the painted surfaces. For multi-unit buildings, this includes records and reports about common areas and other residential dwellings if that information is part of testing for lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards in the target housing. Next, provide all available records and reports on lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards, including historical reports. For purchases, all the testing material, data, and reports must be given to the purchaser to remain with the given owner throughout the life of the building. Finally, even if there is no knowledge of lead or lead hazards, the seller or lessor must disclose that they have no such knowledge, records, or reports. There is one key difference between the sales disclosure and the lease disclosure requirements. For sales transactions, sellers must provide purchasers with a 10-day period to conduct lead-based paint evaluation. The parties may mutually agree, in writing, to change this testing period. For lease renewals, if there is new information on lead-based paint hazards, or not all known information was previously disclosed, the lessor must provide this information and execute an updated disclosure form at the lease renewal. An agent may be involved in the sale or lease transaction. An agent is any party who has a contract with a seller or lessor, representing them in the sale or leasing of target housing. Agents must inform sellers or lessors of their responsibilities and obligations to ensure disclosure is completed properly. The purchaser and lessee acknowledge they received disclosed information, any available reports, and the Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home pamphlet. As mentioned earlier in a sales transaction, the purchaser is offered a 10-day period to test for lead. If lead or lead hazards are found, further negotiations can be considered. HUD and EPA recommend using the form available on the HUD and EPA websites because it includes all the required elements. You may develop your own form, provided it contains all the required elements. Some states, like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Washington, D.C., have a modified disclosure form. The elements of the modified form, or the form itself, must be used. Let's review the key sections of the disclosure form. The first section is the lead warning statement, which is different for sale and rental disclosure. The lead warning statement may be included on the disclosure form as an attachment, or in the contract or lease. The seller or lessor then indicates whether they know of any lead-based paint and/or lead-based paint hazards and have any records and reports available to the seller or lessor. Then, the purchaser or lessee provides acknowledgement by initialing the form. The agent also initials to acknowledge that they inform the owner or lessor of their responsibilities to ensure compliance. Finally, all parties sign and date the form. Let's review a scenario for filling out the disclosure form. In our first example, the seller has never tested and is not aware of any lead-based paint or its hazards, and the purchaser would like to conduct testing. In the Seller's Disclosure section, check AII. Seller has no knowledge of the lead-based paint and/or lead-based paint hazards in the housing. And BII. Seller has no reports or records pertaining to lead-based paint and/or lead-based paint hazards in the housing. The purchaser will not have received any reports because none are available. However, the purchaser should acknowledge that they received the Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home packet. Since the purchaser received a 10-day opportunity to test for lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards, they should initial section EI. Prior to testing, the seller and purchaser should agree on the timing, terms, and follow-up of the testing through a sales contract contingency. The agent initials section F to confirm they explain disclosure requirements to the seller. All parties then sign and date the form. HUD and EPA recognize that the transfer of multiple voluminous technical documents may be burdensome during leasing. For rental transactions, a summary from the existing reports and documents from the licensed lead inspector or risk assessor may be provided in lieu of an entire report. There are common lead disclosure violations that sellers and lessors should be aware of and avoid. These include incorrect or incomplete disclosure forms, misleading information, missing signatures and dates, information disclosed that is not supported by reports, reports that are not disclosed or provided, disclosure after the contract is signed, and fraudulent signatures. There are civil money penalties for violating the lead disclosure rule. Finally, maintaining any lead-based paint records is essential for proper disclosure. Sellers and lessors must retain a copy of the disclosures for at least 3 years from the date of sale, or the date the leasing period begins. Be aware that some HUD programs may have a longer records retention period. Sellers and lessors will keep the original version, while everyone else receives a copy. Electronic copies are acceptable, but hard copies are preferable. When a property is sold, all lead-based paint records must be transferred to the purchaser. All lead-based paint records must be kept for the lifespan of the building, so they may be transferred to all future purchasers. In a HUD-assisted project or activity, if disclosure is not required, it is a best practice to keep a record of the justification. Lead disclosure is a key educational component for buyers and lessees about lead-safe housing. Learn more about lead safety at hud.gov/lead and epa.gov/lead, or by calling 1-800-424-LEAD.